Okay, this will serve as our 30-second warning if people can start finding a seat. Members of the House, if there are spots, feel free to fill in, even if you're not on the higher ed committee. But leave the X's up here for the 9X seats for the higher ed meeting members. If you do that, so if you begin to settle in. Do we have a sign-up sheet out there?
Yeah, it's on the podium.
If folks are here that wish to sign up, there's a sign-up sheet on the podium. If you would just put your name in the measure you wish to talk to. Okay, that was a bit more than 30 seconds, I suppose, but everybody get settled in. Pardon me. Thank everyone for coming this morning. I'm going to ask whoever is closest and wouldn't mind helping us out if we could close the back door just for noise purposes as we move along here this morning. We do have a quorum this morning. We have a number of our members that are online. We have six propositions that we'll hear today. I want to be clear, all of these measures today, can't get this face guard in the right spot this morning, apologies. All of these measures today will be hearing only. We're going to go in the order that they'll be called by the chair. The chair intends at this point to start with House Bill 283, followed by 87, 88, 89 in the order that the representative would like to present them, then moving to House Bill 1 and then House Bill 120. So we have that this morning. I know we have a number of speakers that have signed up for these various measures, either in person or virtually. We'll try to measure our time. We want everybody to have their opportunity to speak, but we also know that there are other items or there are other meetings going on around the Capitol this morning that folks need to get to, so given a hearing only. The other thing is that I will mention on a couple of these propositions, I know people feel passionately about a number of these issues on both sides. I'm going to ask everybody to direct their inquiries through the chair and not talk to or at each other. None of this should be personal. This is a good, solid policy discussion, and we want to have it with the sense of decorum that the people of Georgia expect us to have. With that, I don't know that I think we can dispense with calling the roll. Do we want to recognize the members we have online just so that I'm going to press your button, Ms. George, and I'll let you. Why don't we do that? Why don't we call the roll just very quickly, because that'll let the members online weigh in.
Representative Earhart, Representative Bentley, she's online. I was waiting.
For the record, Representative Bentley's online and on mute.
Representative Burnell, Representative Carpenter,
You know it.
Representative Clark,
Dr. Klein.
Representative Dempsey,
And
Representative Dickey,
Here, I'm online.
Representative Dreyer, Representative Dubnik,
Here.
Representative Holcomb,
Here.
Representative Holland,
Here.
Representative Jaspers,
That beautiful Apple Valley Farm.
Representative Cauchy,
Here.
Representative Kelly, Representative Knight, Representative Mathiak, Representative Metz,
Here.
Representative Park,
Here.
Representative Perkel,
Here.
Representative Reeves,
here online.
Representative Smyrie,
Here.
Representative Washburn,
Here online.
Representative Wiedauer,
Figured that I was on.
Representative Williams,
This is Rick Williams. I'm here, but the sound keeps going in and out, so I can't tell anything.
And this is Representative Burnell. I'm here online.
Okay, went just as smoothly as I suspected it would. We'll move on in the agenda this afternoon. Representative Wilkerson, you can present from there if you want to do that. If you'll press your button so I know which microphone you are, though.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and members of the committee. Today I bring forward House Bill 283, LC 490251. This is a bill dealing with the Zell Miller Scholarship. Over the last year, during the pandemic, I had an opportunity to work with a lot of great students from all over the state, Democrats, Republicans. These were young students who were very engaged after the pandemic struck, and they talked about the challenge they were facing at home. And then that was at the end of last school year. And then throughout that process, we started talking about the Zell Miller Scholarship and looking at it. And what we found was that with the Zell, currently, as you know, you have to have a 3.7 GPA, and you also need a 1200 SAT or a 2600 on the ACT. What happened during the pandemic was parents could not take these tests. Could not find tests for their students. So the students were not able to take tests. They were canceled all across the state. And what ended up happening is you may have had that 3.7, you're an excellent student, but you paid $1,200, $1,500 for a prep class and couldn't take it. Well, what colleges have found is that there's no direct correlation in a lot of ways. Schools across the country, Wake Forest have dropped the SAT requirement. University of Chicago has dropped the SAT, ACT requirement. And so is there really a correlation between student excellence and these test scores? And I would say no, and a lot of college admission professionals would say there's not. So what this does is, it's a very simple bill from the standpoint of what it does. It just removes the requirement that you have to have a 1200 or a 2600 on the ACT. And what that would do is you would still have to maintain that rigor of that course schedule to get a 3.7. That doesn't mean you can take gym. These are the hard classes that you're taking. These students are already taking the AP classes. And so what I've been receiving are emails from parents saying thank you, because right now the Student Finance Commission can only extend the deadline, But if you have a student that's starting at UGA or Georgia Tech or Georgia State or Kennesaw State, do you really want them studying for the SAT to try to get the Zell, or do you want them focusing on their studies? I would say we want them focusing on their studies. So I'd be open for any questions, but is what the bill would do is just remove that requirement that I believe we're moving away from anyway as far as the SAT and ACT.
Sorry, thank you. Will you take a question, Representative?
Yes, I'll take some questions. Yes, thank you.
No, I'm gonna, not knowing where everyone's sitting out here, I'm gonna call you by number and until I can put numbers with names. Number one, is that you, Chairman Dreyer?
Yes,
Yeah,
it appears
yes, sir.
to be. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Whip, for bringing this bill. I did just want to ask, Georgia State's done extensive studies, and they have shown that actually the #1 indicator of success in college is not your SAT or ACT score, it is your unmet financial need. Far and away, if students have more unmet financial need, they succeed less, and it seems like just following the data, we can really improve the outcome for a lot of students with your bill. Is that right?
You are correct. This is definitely a data-driven bill, and I appreciate you for bringing that question forward.
Further questions? Do we have online questions? One of the things we're going to, obviously, as I mentioned, this is, I have another, number four. Representative Ayer.
Thank you. Just understanding, and I understand the concept here, that it may not be the #1 determining factor of success in college, but certainly it would be in the top, let's say, 2 or 3. My understanding is one of the purposes of having a generalized ACT or standardized test is to create sort of an equalized standard for those students, given the fact that their GPA rigor can vary from school to school. Rigor can vary from county to county. It can vary from region to region in our state. So whereas by having both requirements, both a GPA and a standardized test, you're sort of allowing those students that maybe, or you're certainly giving information to those admitting universities, another little benchmark, another a point that they can look at and say, you know, on this equal playing field, this is where this student falls. So whereas it may not be the #1 indicator of success, I do believe it would be near the top.
Let me answer that. So as I spoke to colleges, they did not mention that was one of the top indicators. What they looked at was the students' grades, and they looked at the activities they were involved in. Because typically, if you look at a student compared to other students, so a lot of these colleges have people that focus on different regions of the state or different regions of the country. And so they know kind of where the grade inflation may be and where it's not. Another equalizer is the AP exam. The AP is pretty consistent throughout, you know, it's consistent throughout the country. So I think that equalizes it. So if you look at the SAT and ACT, success on that typically is driven by income level. So if you have a higher income level, you can afford the test, and you have 2 parents at home that went to college, you can afford that. It was interesting because I did read a study, an article about a young lady that was applying to Cornell, and she said by not having to study for the SAT, ACT, she was able to focus on her studies. So these students are actually pulling away from their academic pursuits to study for a one-day test, which weighs more than 12 years of academics. So where it falls in line, I think we're going to get a better indication, because if you speak to the college professors, the college presidents now, they'll tell you that they have a year of data almost, where they'll tell you that the students that were admitted without SAT scores, they're actually retaining at the same level as the ones they weren't, because what they're doing is looking at them as a whole. And when I talked to, for example, the Georgia Southern president, he said that their level is about the same as far as retention between those that did the SAT and those that didn't. So, but I think it requires further study, but thank you for that.
And Mr. Chairman, may I have a follow-up question? Just wanted to confirm that I know that you indicated that one of the reasons for bringing this bill, or the reason it initially came to your attention, was the inavailability of some students to be able to, the locations to be able to take these standardized tests during COVID. But I just want to clarify that this is not, you're not putting a time limit on that. You're not just calling for removal of those requirements during a pandemic period. You're looking for a permanent removal of the consideration of ACT or SAT for college admissions in the state of Georgia.
That is correct. And so the reason,
Forgive me, for For Zell, not admission.
For Zell, yeah. So I think the pandemic has not necessarily created the need for this bill. The pandemic just highlighted that we had an obsession with tests that is not necessarily relevant. So I think people that were not necessarily supportive of the bill in the past now are calling and saying, look, I did everything we're supposed to do. We paid for the prep class. We paid for to take the test, and they got canceled. So I would say the reason for the bill is because I think it's good policy. I think what we had in 2011 was good policy. But what we did was raise the rigor, and I agree with keeping it at a 3.7. But no, the reason for the bill is not the pandemic. I think it just opens up the people that are considering the need for the bill.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Representative Perkle. No.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And I am unaware, and I really honestly have not looked at the subjective versus non-subjective nature of the awarding of the Zell Miller Scholarship. But I find it concerning that we're looking at basically doing away with the absolute most non-subjective measure, and it does not necessarily say that there's always positive correlation, but I would have to assume, I mean, we all assume, without, there again, I've not looked at the studies specifically, but that is a non-subjective measure of achievement. It is not perfect correlation by any stretch, but if you have two identical GPAs and you look at a non-subjective measure, then one has another tool to use in using. And I'm very concerned about doing away with that. So that was my only question. Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for that question. So, and I understand the SAT and ACT are easy things to fall back on, but we don't look at an SAT score and say two kids got a 1200 and then say, well, one comes from an impoverished family where they had to work 30 hours a week to raise money to take that test, and then another family whose child was able to just afford the test and get prep classes. So I would say that it's not subjective. It is very subjective because I think what it requires is college counselors to look at the student as a whole. Going through this application process, looking at various schools all over the country, they look at the student as a whole, the holistic approach they call it, and they don't look at the SAT, ACT as much as they look at what activities, who you are, where you rank inside your school. Where you rank inside your school is probably a bigger indicator of success than an SAT score. So how you relate to your peers, because if you go down, we had this conversation with the AP exam. If you go to some schools, they don't even have AP classes.
Representative, if I can, I'm going to really.
Okay, thank you. Yeah,
I appreciate you answering the question. I've got several other people that want to ask a question. I've kind of been wider with the latitude than normal.
Yeah.
We can debate the measure when we get the measure.
Yeah.
And that's everybody's. I welcome everybody's opinion when we get to that point. At this point, we have a number of things on the agenda today. If we have questions about the bill to the gentleman, let's try to do that. And I have 6, 7 people left that want to ask a question. Yeah. But we'll certainly, this comes back forward before we get to a vote. And when and if we get a motion on it, we'll listen to everybody at length. But let's try to keep it to questions. Representative Dr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. My question was not necessarily about a specific line in the bill. It was going to continue the questioning about the SAT and ACT, so should I wait?
Yeah, if we could, I mean, if it's about the use of whether we should or we shouldn't be doing that, I think that's a policy matter for debate, which goes to the passage of this bill to remove that requirement. Again, the question here is, what I see as a question is, would this affect everybody going forward, not just 1 year? Yes. Not as the, so if you have a specific question, for instance, if you would want to say, is there quantitative data that says that, people that, have the 1200 keep it, people that, get into schools that didn't get to Zell also get the 3.3, Those are questions to ask the gentleman that we'll go to student finance and get, if that makes sense. Again, I don't want to cut off debate. We'll have debate at that point, but given our calendar today, let's try to ask sort of objective questions that the gentleman can answer.
Well, I can frame my question a little more objectively than I was prior to that statement. So to your point, are there examples of students who perform very well in school, rank very high in school, but don't necessarily test as high on standardized tests because maybe they do not have access to things like Kaplan and other SAT prep courses, and so they are actually very good students who have maybe gone on to get bachelor's and maybe even PhDs in microbiology that would not have qualified for the Zell Miller Scholarship based on the way that the scholarship is set up now.
I believe I have the opportunity to serve with someone that would fit that category. So yes, I would say that would definitely be the case.
Thank you. We did. Representative Carpenter.
Yeah, just a real quick one. So would you suggest that we could do either or? So if the SAT or SAT is not available, but the AP test is, they have to score a certain number on that AP test. Is that, I mean, what's your thoughts about that?
Thank you for the question. No, what I'm suggesting is that we move away from standardized tests. I mean, I think we look at the 12-year record, and that would be my recommendation.
I would be open to the thought of either or, but I think testing to me is important because, you know, the 40-yard dash is not a perfect test, but you know, the NFL Combine, they're testing these guys because they got to know how to separate folks.
We're going to hold that for debate, Representative Carpenter. We're questioning now. I'm going to get a little tighter on my friends and my other friends. Chairman Jaspers.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. You know, Representative, is it not true yet that AP test that you described as another judge is not accessible throughout the state of Georgia, especially in rural school systems and some of the poorer systems in our state, and that, you know, the SAT, ACT gives those children and students an opportunity to shine and rise above just due to their hard work and effort.
I would agree with the gentleman that the AP exams are not available throughout the state, and that's, I guess, means that it takes even more work for those students to get that 3.7. So with the AP exam, with an AP class, you get a 1 bonus point. Without that, you basically have to get almost a 4.0 student in some parts of the state, get straight A. So I would say that's even more reason to move away from these standardized tests. But I'd be happy to talk to you on the floor about that.
But Mr. Chairman, also, just to follow up, would the gentleman not agree that grade inflation has been a absolute driver in some of this and will even be more an issue with pandemic grading?
I would say that grade inflation has always been a concern, but I would also say that if you look at the fiscal note for this bill, it assumes that students are maintaining their grade point averages. You'll hear about a bill shortly that you could have a 4.0 in high school, not get a 1200 on the SAT, be a 4.0 student in nuclear engineering or whatever, like the most complicated subject you want, and never get Zell. I don't think that's the right answer. So in this case, some students may get Zell and lose it, but what you're doing is taking the chance on your best and brightest to have that 1 year of success. So that student down in Bainbridge may get a chance to go to college that would not have that chance. So I think that's what this bill would do.
Thank you, Chairman Jaspers. Representative Park.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Mr. Whip, for the bill. I was wondering two things, if I may. First, the 1200 score for the SAT in order to be eligible for the Zell Miller Scholarship. Was that 1200 score objective or a subjective number? And I'm looking at my other screen, so I apologize about that. But could you share any information about the formulation of that requirement for the Zell Miller?
if the gentleman would yield to that, and if Representative Park would allow me, we have Commissioner Riley with Georgia Student Finance. If we can call on her for that, the answer to that. Did you have any? You want to drop your second question on us, and we'll do them at the same time?
Yes. The second question, and reading the fiscal note, where we're talking about, I think 6,000 to 7,000 students who otherwise have an eligible GPA, but not 72% of whom would not be eligible because of the requirement to take an SAT or ACT. I was wondering whether or not there was demographic information of those students in terms of their race, ethnicity, socioeconomic status, and geographic background.
The Student Finance Commission, would they be able to? I need to get that information.
If you'll yield to that, we'll go as Commissioner Riley. I see you there. Can you impart any wisdom for us?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. At this time, we do not have information based on the students that this bill would apply to, based on their geographic location or socioeconomic background.
Okay, and the second question, Commissioner, I know this predates you in your position, but is there any information as to a national standard as to where the scores for the Zell, I believe that was Representative Park's question. How do we ascertain 1,200 was the right place, or I believe 26 on the SAT? Do you have any information?
Mr. Chairman, I apologize. I don't have an answer for that. I know that it is in statute, and that is how we apply it based on that score being achieved by the applicant.
No, I understand, and as I said, no apologies necessary. That predates you in the position. Perhaps take a quick look and see if there's any underlying data for it, and we'll get back to that later. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. I see no further questions on this item. We will take it under advisement. One of the things that I want to say as we look at these bills, I know a member from Albany, Representative Dukes, has put forth a resolution for a study committee over the summer. I signed that with the representative to look at the application of HOPE at all. So as we look at this, it is possible that these measures will be rolled in and done that. And I know not everyone wants to say is, oh, maybe next year, but when we're looking at a measure here that's $131,000 to do this, there's some things that we could bring the basic HOPE scholarship up from where it is now. I've done some research on some dollars that involve that, which would bring everybody that's achieving the HOPE, not just those that, to achieve the Zell. We'll roll that in and look at that and involve you in the discussion, Representative. Thank you. Did you have anything you want to close with?
No, I just want to thank the committee for hearing this bill out, and I know a lot of families would appreciate it, and I'd be open to discussing with Representative Earhart the timing of the bill as well. It needs to be a sunset, just so we can get the data, because I think the data will show us that this is the right thing. But I want to thank you all for your questions, and appreciate the opportunity.
Commissioner Riley, if you would, as Representative Evans is getting ready for her measures, can you, I think this is a good time to mention what the commission has done relative to those students that found themselves in a bit of a pinch that couldn't get the test last year, and the extension that you've done as it would apply to the fall 2020 enrollees. Can you just give the committee a brief update on that while Ms. Evans is getting ready?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Absolutely. About a little less than a year ago, when the pandemic first began and schools closed and the state institutions closed, the governor issued an executive order that extended the deadline for submission of test scores for the class of 2020, and then further extended it this past fall to allow those students until the end of this academic year to submit qualifying test scores and would receive the Zell benefit retroactively. Current class of 2021 has not received that same status. However, the governor's office is monitoring the availability of testing sites and locations in conjunction with the College Board and the ACT testing teams to ensure that there are sufficient testing seats available in Georgia for those students that would like to have the opportunity to qualify for the Zell Miller Scholarship in the class of 2021.
Thank you, Commissioner. And if for bringing back to the committee later, you might have it now, but I'm not going to ask you for it. We're going to move on. Is if you would have numbers relative to the number of Zell recipients over the past few years, and how that relates to the number that went in with Zell in fall of 2020. Do you understand the question? Is
Yes, I do.
What the numbers look like, was there a great deviation because of the pandemic? My supposition is many of the qualifiers had qualifying scores in front of the pandemic, which is not to lighten the issue of those that weren't able to take the score, but I think I've heard from you without specific numbers that a number of students already had qualifying scores prior to things shutting down in March of last year. Correct?
Mr. Chairman, we'll provide that information
Thank
for
you.
you. Yes, we have been monitoring it, and we will pull it together for you.
Thank you. We'll move on now to Ms. Evans. I also wanted to let folks know that we'll probably take a break after Ms. Evans. We'll give you you get 3 strikes, right? You have three opportunities, 3 measures for us, and then we'll take a brief break before we go into HB1. Ms. Evans, press a button for me. Yes, ma'am.
All right. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, members of the committee. I'm going to start with House Bill 88. House Bill 88 is a bill that would fully fund the HOPE grant so that the award amount for the grant, this is not the scholarship, this is just the grant for technical colleges, would cover the cost of tuition to attend one of our technical colleges. Currently, the coverage is about 76% of tuition. So students in technical college are the most price-sensitive students we have in higher education, so even that gap of 24% can knock some students out of that opportunity to earn their higher ed credential. We know that students at technical college are more likely to be from household incomes less than $40,000, more likely to be second-time around students, and just more, as I said, price-sensitive. We also know that the degrees that are earned in technical colleges are in very high demand. We currently already offer 100% tuition coverage for several programs at our technical colleges through the High Demand Career Grant. But truthfully, every program offered at our technical colleges are in high demand, and the numbers tell this story. The TCSG numbers are that 88.6% of their graduates are placed in field upon graduation, and they have a 99.1% total placement overall. So we are simply not graduating someone from a degree program in technical college and then they're not able to get a job, which tells us that all of those jobs that they're training for are in high demand and should be treated the same as we treat the high demand career grants. The technical college system also has a very unique, I call it the satisfaction guaranteed clause, where if a graduate goes out into their field and the employer finds that they're deficient in any area that someone in that field should not be deficient in, TCSG will retrain that student for free. And this clause is rarely used, which tells us again that we're putting out a really good product. We're also not wasting, I hate to use that word, but the students that go in, by and large, come out. There's a 76.4% graduation from our TCSG institutions. That compares to a 26% four-year graduation rate at our university system institutions and a 50% six-year graduation rate at those same institutions. 76.4%. We are getting what we pay for when we send a student through TCSG. During the joint budget hearings last month, Commissioner Dozier talked about the need for a public relations campaign for TCSG. And I would submit to you that this bill helps with that. It makes it simple. The HOPE grant is available. If you go to technical college, pick a program, your tuition will be covered. You don't have to think about which ones will be covered at 100% and which ones won't. It's a very simple proposition that I think would help the school attract students. Now, the bigger question that I know this committee and other legislators always have is, how are we going to pay for it? And I would tell you that we've got a very simple way to pay for it. Right now, as this committee is, I'm sure, very well aware, we have a restricted and unrestricted lottery reserve fund that we run. We've done that since 2011 when the big changes went through. We're required to keep in a restricted reserve 50% of the prior year payouts. We have that in a lockbox, excuse the phrase, right now, $603,684,500. That's in a box. It will not be touched. What we also have, though, on top of that is an unrestricted reserve amount that now sits 128% higher, brings total reserves 128% higher than they're required to be, because we have $780,893,750 sitting in an unrestricted reserve fund, funds that we are not required by law to hold at all. These funds have been building up over the last 10 years, on average, $72,000 a year. Again, this has been happening for 10 years. So I think at this point, it's safe to say that this $72 million a year is going into this unrestricted reserve every year for 10 years. I think at this point, it's safe to say that those are recurring funds that we could put toward our product, which here in the state is our people. The cost of this bill is estimated, depending on how enrollment goes, to be between $10 and $20 million. The highest estimate on the fiscal note is $20 million. So I would submit that we could certainly afford it. We would be putting money to good use. I would also remind the committee that the people of this state passed the lottery originally in the early 90s to help more students go to college, not to have money sitting in an account that, as far as I can tell, is barely even earning the interest that we would all earn on our checking accounts. I know that's a lot of numbers this early, Mr. Chairman, so I'm going to pause, but I know cost is always a concern, and so I really wanted to let the committee know that I've been very thoughtful about the cost of this bill. I'd be happy to answer any questions.
Thank you. Are there questions? Still, I agree with everyone. It's very disconcerting when you're seeing yourself on a 2-second delay. So, any questions? I have number 4, Representative Earhart.
Thank you, Representative. It is, and correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that we already have a program in place to cover full tuition for students at our Georgia technical schools, and that's the Zell Miller grant. Which does have an academic GPA requirement, post-secondary GPA requirement. So for those students who are able to maintain that, there certainly is an opportunity there for full coverage. And correct me if I'm wrong, my understanding is that this bill completely eliminates the Zell grant.
Thank you, Representative. And there is currently a Zell Miller grant. That was a bill that myself and the former Representative Earhart worked on together, and it brought back a lot of students to our technical college when we passed that. So that does require a 3.5. This would make the HOPE grant across the board, as long as you meet that 2.0, which was which is adequate yearly progress, which is what the HOPE grant was originally established with as a criteria back in the 90s. So all of those students who qualify for the HOPE grant would qualify for full tuition. And the reason a lot of folks don't understand that there are 2 HOPE programs, the HOPE grant and the HOPE scholarship. Those were very intentionally created in the 90s to be different. There's a reason that the grant doesn't have the rigor that the scholarship has, because of the name. Scholarship, rigor, grant was always meant to be workforce development. So this is about getting students in, getting them trained, and getting them in our workforce. And that's what this bill would allow more students to do. Whether it's a 3.5 student, a 3.0 student, or a 2.0 student in technical college, the numbers show that the system is graduating them at high rates, placing them at high rates, and that they're performing at high rates. So I think at this point in our technical college system, it's fair to say that the GPAs are arbitrary. They're not telling us whether the student's going to take good use of our dollars and finish their courses and become a good tax-paying citizen. They all are at a high rate. So I would just say that we don't need that distinction anymore.
Yes, ma'am. Dr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Representative Evans, for bringing this great bill. My question is, does the fiscal note or the cost of the program that you mentioned, does that take into account the return on investment that we as the state of Georgia gets when these students successfully complete these programs and then enter the workforce in some very high demand jobs, but even in jobs that are not necessarily high demand, but they're staying here in Georgia and they're contributing to society with the much higher paying jobs? Is that included in the fiscal note that we've been provided today?
Thank you, Representative, and no, it doesn't. And it's also worth noting that the funds we're spending on the grant to get these students through college and out in the workforce are lottery dollars. The dollars that are going to come back to us when those students end up being workers and buying homes and paying taxes and sales taxes and all the taxes that we use here, those go to our general fund. So this is a great return on our investment, and indeed was the whole reason that the program was established in the 90s in the first place.
Yeah, just to be clear with all of our fiscal notes that for these bills and those that we see on the floor, or if you're on Ways and Means, these are static scoring bills. They're not a true look at the dynamic economic picture. So if you have a credit, it just tells you how much tax dollars you lose. It doesn't say that if that incentivizes a business to come or grow, and it pays other sorts of taxes. We've talked for years about enhancing our program to do a little better job of that and turn it into a dynamic scoring program. But this is just a static program with one-sided. Representative Park, remotely.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you, Representative Evans, for the bill. Similar to a question I had for the prior presenter, you had mentioned that 3.5 GPA was arbitrary for purposes of receiving a Zell Miller scholarship. Was there any objective or scientific basis for establishing that GPA requirement at 3.5, or was that simply a determination of the Georgia General Assembly? And similar to the prior fiscal note, is there any information as to the number of students who are unable to attend some of our TCSG institutions because of this potentially arbitrary GPA requirement?
Thank you, Representative. Yes, for all intents and purposes, it was arbitrary. At the time, we knew it would provide full tuition for approximately 20% of the students that were going through our TCSG institutions at the time. So I took it as a 20% win at the time. I wanted a 100% win. I was trying to do this back then. And to your point of do we know that there are students that are not able to start or able to finish because of the cost? We absolutely know that to be true. When I was working on the bill back in, I guess that would have been 2014 or 2015, I did a tour of our TCSG institutions. I did one in South Georgia, Middle Georgia, Southeast, Southwest, Middle, Northeast, Northwest, and Metro Atlanta, and talked to students, talked to admissions officers, talked to financial aid officers, and we heard again and again that students were simply not able to start because they couldn't afford the difference between what the grant covered and what it didn't. Again, students are still having to pay for fees, they're still having to pay for books, they're paying for transportation costs, everything that goes on with life. And as I said, these students are extremely price sensitive. They don't typically have mom and dad to call for money, because typically in a lot of these instances, they are mom and dad, because these are a lot of second time around students that are already working and raising a family. And so you take any amount of that pie away and they're simply not able to stay.
Thank you.
Thank you. Chairman Dreyer, you wave. Chairman Couch, Representative, virtually, Representative Couch.
Yes, good morning, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for presenting this very important bill. My question is, and it's not just a question for this bill, but it's a question that all bills that affect the scholarship and the grants we have. Do we have a way of tracking students who are scholarship or grant recipients once they graduate and see whether they stay in Georgia or not?
Thank you, Representative. That's a great question. I would defer to USG and TCSG to let us know how they track students. I assume they try, and I'm sure it's an imperfect system because not everybody cooperates in providing their contact information. But I feel safe in saying that students who go through our TCSG institutions are by and large at a high clip staying in our state. And that's, again, why this is such a great investment.
Thank you. That's a very good comment. Thank you.
We'll, just in the interest of time, we'll, I know Commissioner Riley's still with us. We'll let her spread that along with USG and TCSG and try to provide some data. But I think the representative is right, Representative Evans. It's a privacy issue. I don't know that you can require somebody that graduates to check back in. I know our alma mater, the University of Georgia, sends me notes several times a year to keep up with me and invite me to come back and send them additional funds, even though we're not attending anymore, right? So
absolutely.
The system components, and I think the technical colleges do too, they try to stay in touch with their graduates, for a symbiotic relationship that's good for their students and it's good for the universities and the technical college components. I don't see any more questions. We do have at least one speaker that I'd like to go to if the ladies finish, and then I'll give you the last word on the bill.
Thank you.
Ms. Lee, are you online with us or are you here today? You want to talk to the yeah, okay. Ms. Lee wishes to talk to Representative Evans' package of bills this morning, so she'll waive for now. With that, if you would like to close this one, or if and then you have the next two. So
thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to present House Bill 88. I think it's one of the best investments of our lottery dollars that we could make here, and I appreciate your favorable consideration. I'll move to House Bill 87, which also deals with the grant, slightly more micro here. This bill would make it possible to use the HOPE grant to pay for associate degree courses that students are taking at our technical colleges. This was a little bit of a surprise to me that right now, if you are taking associate degree courses at our technical colleges, the HOPE grant is not available to pay for that. Students can use the HOPE scholarship to pay for it, but as we know, that there are rigor requirements there that not all students who might want to attend our technical colleges can meet. So because of that, we feel like there are students that are not getting started. The other problem is that the scholarship has a requirement that students must, the HOPE scholarship is not available for students who are 10 years away from their high school graduation. The grant does not have that requirement or that limitation. And so as I mentioned, you've got a lot of second time around students that may be coming back to get retrained for a second career that are many years past 10 years from high school graduation. And so they want to take these associate degree courses. Yes, they could use the scholarship, but it's not available to them because of this 10-year limitation. This would allow them to use the HOPE grant to pay for those courses. We need more students working toward associate degrees because associate degree skilled workers are in very high demand in our state. Just as one example, in 2018, there were 19,152 associate degrees conferred in our state, but the entry-level job demand for these degrees was almost double that at 35,574. So we need more students taking these degree courses. The other problem is that a student may start at a technical college system toward a diploma program, which is covered by the HOPE grant, and then they want to move on to an associate degree in that same field and find that they have to stop because they don't qualify for the scholarship, whereas they were using the grant before. And one example I'll use, which is in a high demand career area, the practical nursing diploma is covered not only by the HOPE grant, but also categorized as high demand, so it's 100% coverage. The next logical step for a student who obtained their practical nursing diploma might be to get an associate science of nursing degree. Because that's an associate degree, the student is no longer eligible to use either the high demand or just the regular HOPE grant. They'd have to use the scholarship. And if they don't qualify either because of rigor or because they're 10 years from high school graduation, they would have to stop. One note that some may have noted on the bill is that there's a lot of language deleted from the code toward the end relating to option B students. A lot of our college and career academy students are able to take option B, which does allow you to use the grant to cover those associate degree courses at technical college. And the only reason that's deleted is because this bill opens up the ability to use the HOPE grant for associate degrees across the board. So you no longer need that carve out, which we're currently providing. Again, I'm always very conscious of the cost. Here, it would be $23 million, the way the grant is funded right now at that 76% coverage. If you were to also pass House Bill 88, that would add $7 million. So you're talking about $30 million. I hate giving y'all all these numbers this morning because I know your eyes are glazing over, but I can't help it. So if you were to take 87 and 88 together, you're talking about approximately, I think, $40 million, which again is well under that total now recurring amount that we are adding to an account that is just literally sitting somewhere and not doing anything to work for our state. That is my comments on House Bill 87. I would be glad to take any questions on this, and I also will note, Mr. Chairman, that we do have a student present who would like to share some testimony about this bill as well at the appropriate time.
Committee have questions? See no question. Do we have anybody online? Okay, I have 87. I have Catherine, is it Mulvaney? Catherine Mulvaney is online. Catherine, are you with us?
She's on mute still.
Catherine, I'm told you're still muted if you Where do you?
Yes.
Oh, there we go. Okay.
Sorry, I'm having an audio issue here.
Yes, ma'am. You have the floor. You wanted to talk to us about House Bill 87?
Can you hear me?
We can.
Yes. Okay, good.
Okay.
Sorry, I'm having an audio issue here. Okay.
Yes, ma'am. You have the floor. You wanted to talk to us about House Bill 87?
Yes.
We can.
Sorry, there's also a delay. Okay, good.
Okay.
Okay.
Yes, ma'am. You have the floor. You wanted to talk to us about House Bill 87?
Yes.
We can.
Sorry, there's also a delay. I am currently a student at Gwinnett Technical College. I started my program back in 2018. I'm in the business management program. And I am also a GED recipient. I started taking adult ed classes here in 2017, and I was actually the Eagle that year as well. I am currently a student at Gwinnett Technical College. I started my
Hey,
program.
let me make a suggestion here. Turn your volume down because we're getting feedback.
Here in 2017, I was actually the Eagle that year as well. I apologize. I have no sound at all at this point. So there are two main points where I feel like my college career was sort of in jeopardy. And that was when I began. I was not able to receive any financial aid outside of Pell as a GED recipient. Now, when I was in high school, I had a lot of challenges. My father passed away when I was 11, and we were in poverty. We were housing and food insecure, and I just couldn't finish high school at that time. So it took me a long time to get back. I'm 36 years old now. And since I began my program, I have a 4.0 GPA. I am a member of Phi Theta Kappa Honor Society. But when I first began college, there was no funding available. I was able to receive Pell and that was it. And thankfully that did cover most of my costs. But what happened was when I was partway through my program, I had completed my certificate. I lost Pell because I got a better job and I no longer met the income requirements. And so I, at that time, was receiving Zell Miller. But it covers certificates and it covers diplomas, but it does not cover associate level classes. So, and it only covers tuition. It does not cover any fees. It does not cover books. So there was still, several $100s each semester that was not getting covered. And so I was taking out student loans to pay for that. And I finished my diploma in December. I am now a full-time student because of the pandemic. I was laid off last year. And I just had one semester left to finish my associate degree. And thankfully, I am receiving Pell now to cover that, but I have no state funding at all. And so if I did not qualify for Pell, if I were still working and, putting back into the system and, if I were still, a tax-paying citizen, I wouldn't be receiving any funding at all. And that is a big hurdle to jump, because it's just that one semester. It was 5 classes to finish my degree, and that's all I needed. And I can't imagine how many students are not able to finish their degrees because of precisely that. Because I was only making $42,000 a year, and I don't have any children, but a lot of people like me do. And so I can only imagine, how many people have to stop, how many people are good students who are, really dedicated and have to stop their program because there's no more funding.
Catherine, thank you very much. We heard you. I know we've got severe latency here, so we're going to move on, but thank you for telling us your story. And if you'll drop us a chat thing in the chat box here, that we can reach out to you if we need to, if you care to, that we could contact you further. Thank you so much. Representative Evans, you had somebody here that wanted to speak as well to the measure?
Would like to testify. Bill's.
Ms. Lee, are you going to wait on the whole package, or you want to come now? Okay. Okay, so we have one more. Do you want to wait on? Okay. Oh, yes, ma'am. Then yes, ma'am. Please. Self-service microphone back there. You have to turn it on.
Can you hear me now?
Oh, we can.
Good morning. My name is Jennifer Lee, and I'm a senior policy analyst at the Georgia Budget and Policy Institute. And I focus on common sense solutions that will help more students in Georgia pursue education after high school, whether that's through a technical college or a four-year college or university. And I want to start by just stating the obvious and thanking the members of this committee who believe that education is the road to a better life, as I believe we all do here. We know that access to education and training beyond high school really develops individuals' talents, and we've seen, especially with this economic disruption recently caused by the pandemic, that really helps protect individuals as much as possible against job loss. And there are just numerous benefits to education that I believe we all support. I'd like to speak to you today about House Bills 87 and 88, which would support Georgia's technical college students. I'm going to focus my comments a little more on 87 because I believe 88 is a bit more straightforward. You've heard that it would restore the Hope Grants to full tuition support, which would provide a much needed financial boost for technical college students. Nearly 30,000 students would benefit at this time at a cost of $9 million. at current enrollment levels and 67,000 students at a cost of $20 million at 2015 enrollment levels. Currently, technical colleges offer 3 different types of credentials: certificates, diplomas, and associate degrees, applied associate degrees. And students are eligible for 2 different HOPE programs, HOPE grants and HOPE scholarships. So what House Bill 87 would do would bring all 3 technical college credentials under the umbrella of HOPE grants and standardize the financial aid eligibility for these students. Right now, students pursuing associate degrees in technical colleges have very low access to HOPE. These students are 8 times less likely to get HOPE than their peers pursuing certificates or diplomas. But at the same time, we've seen interest in associate degrees is high and growing. Today, about half of technical college enrollment is at the associate degree level, compared to less than 20% 10 years ago. House Bill 87, it's estimated that 20,000 students, could benefit at a cost of $23 million. I believe that one unintended consequence, as you heard from the student earlier, of having these 2 different sets of HOPE eligibility requirements in technical colleges is that some lose HOPE as they progress in their education. Academically, programs are designed so students can advance seamlessly from certificate to diploma to associate degree level coursework. It's what's known as stackable credentials and kind of the higher ed lingo, but the financial aid policy is unfortunately not as seamless. And I believe House Bill 87 provides an opportunity to just smooth out that gap, and then House Bill 88 would boost the overall support. I just believe both of these bills would help provide more support to our technical college students and really help support a more educated and prosperous Georgia. And I'm open for questions if anyone has any.
Thank you, Ms. Lee. Any questions? Any questions online? I see no questions, Ms. Lee. Thank you very much. No further questions. Representative Evans, coming back to you and you can complete that one and move on to your next measure.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And for both House Bills 87 and 88 dealing with our technical college system, I want to throw another stat out for the committee. We need currently, the current estimates are from Complete College Georgia, that we need about 60% of our Georgians to have some higher ed credential, whether that's a certificate, a diploma, associate's degree, a 4-year degree, a PhD, whatever. We are about 15 to 20% shy of that right now. So as a General Assembly, I think our goal should be to get more of our Georgians in those seats of our technical colleges, to get them out in the workforce to these jobs that we know are in demand and that we need to be the state that we want to be. And this is the cheapest and easiest and fastest way for us to do that, by investing in programs that boost the grant for our technical college system. And again, I appreciate the ability to present this morning and ask for your favorable consideration when you take these bills under advisement.
Thank you. Number 89.
Thank you.
This is, I'm going to give you a preamble introduction. This is going along the lines with the representative's bill earlier about helping people achieve the Zell, is it not, after they arrive in college, if they don't bring it with them when they come, correct?
Correct, Mr. Chairman. We switched gears here toward the scholarship program, specifically the Zell Miller Scholarship, and House Bill 89 provides a pathway for students to earn that full tuition scholarship after high school graduation. Currently, if you don't earn that Zell Miller Scholarship at high school graduation with a 3.7 GPA and the 1200 SAT, you never have a chance to earn it. You could go to college and make a 4.0, as Representative Wilkerson pointed out. You could make a 4.0 every semester and still not have the opportunity to earn this full tuition scholarship. What this bill would provide is that if a student maintains and earns a 3.3 at 2 consecutive checkpoints, which are typically semesters, then they would start earning the full tuition Zell Miller Scholarship. And the 3.3 is just in line with what we require the current Zell Miller scholars to maintain once they get to college. So these students that are achieving a 3.3 at 2 consecutive checkpoints, they're meeting the rigor that we want them to, that we put in code for Zell Miller scholars. They just didn't have the SAT score when they graduated high school. And we heard a lot of discussion this morning about whether the SAT measures how well you're going to do in school or not. And anyone who's spent about 5 minutes with me in this body has probably heard me tell my own HOPE story. I was one of the first classes to get HOPE. I was born in Ringgold, Georgia, first in my family to go to college, certainly did not have the ability to afford a test prep. I had a 3.8 GPA, but barely 1,000 on my SAT. At the time, that SAT requirement was not on the HOPE scholarship rigor requirement, so I was able to have a full tuition scholarship and go to the University of Georgia, go to law school, and go on to a life that my younger self never could have imagined. So I am anecdotal evidence, but evidence nonetheless, just like Representative Clark, that that SAT score does not necessarily tell us the whole story about how well a student is going to do in college and whether they're worthy of our investment. And I would also share with the committee that the fiscal note for House Bill 89 and the fiscal note for the bill you heard earlier from Representative Wilkerson are roughly the same. And that's very important as evidence of our discussion earlier. If students who didn't have a 1200 SAT score at high school graduation, but could meet the requirements that I'm proposing here in House Bill 89 to have a 3.3 GPA at 2 consecutive checkpoints, if those two sets of people were completely different, our fiscal notes would be completely different. What the fiscal notes tell us is that the students who come in and can keep a 3.3 at 2 consecutive checkpoints are the same students that would have a 3.7 at high school GPA, but not necessarily the same students who would have a 1200 SAT. But those students nonetheless are performing at a high level at college. So I like my bill. Obviously, I introduced it for a reason because I thought it was unfair that students were not able to have the opportunity to earn this full tuition scholarship if they didn't have a 1200 SAT, and I want to provide that pathway for them. But honestly, the fiscal notes say that we should, as a body, the best policy would be to pass Representative Wilkerson's bill. So it's probably a weird thing for a representative to come here and say is, don't pass my bill, pass someone else's bill. But the goal is the same, the cost is the same, and once again, I think we're receiving evidence more than anecdotally across who knows how many thousands of students in our system right now. Numbers don't lie. The SAT is not a good indicator of how a student is going to do in college and whether they're going to meet the rigor that we want them to at the 3.3. There is, Mr. Chairman, I believe another student online that has some testimony on this bill, but before obviously move to that at your pleasure, but I just wanted to make sure that you knew she was there, and then I would certainly be glad to stand for any questions.
Yes, we do have somebody online, so while we get them together, Ms. Vasquez?
Yes, that's me.
Oh, there you go. You must be closer to us that we don't have as much latency as we did before.
Oh, okay.
Better well, internet connection. You have the floor.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you for allowing me to speak today. My name is Mariela Vasquez. I am currently attending Dalton State College. I grew up in Chatsworth, Georgia, and currently reside in Dalton, Georgia. I am here today to talk about my story, but also my point of view on this House Bill 89. I was that successful student in high school. I graduated with high honors with a 3.92 GPA, but I was not able to successfully pass the Zell Miller requirements to obtain Zell Miller. So I continued on with just having hope. That I feel like was the most challenging time, my high school transitioning from high school to college, because I am a first generation college student and I had hopes and dreams just like everybody else. But when it comes to money, you do have to think about, your possibilities and where could you potentially attend and go. And with that decisions in mind and my hope eligibility, which as you all know, only allows you to pay for allows for partial tuition, I decided to stay at Dalton State, very close to home.
And up to this day, I don't regret that decision. I am currently very involved on my campus, and I am thankful for my campus. I am the student body president at this time. But going back to this whole Zell Miller, if I would have had the chance, I probably would have thought about another school or university if the Zell Miller thing would have been provided, if the Zell Miller full tuition would have been provided. And right now I'm able to pay for my tuition and things because of my Dalton State Foundation that we have. I've been able to apply for separate scholarships that have allowed me to fully successfully pay my tuition on campus. And I'm proud to be a student, but I feel like that barrier was there at a time. It was very hard to be able to, you know, successfully accomplish a good GPA, but just not be a good test taker and not have all resources to be able to fully pass it and obtain the Zell Miller scholarship. And right now I currently hold a 3.75 GPA, and I am studying elementary education. So I want to be an educator. I work in my community and I value education, and I think it's very important. So I'm here speaking on those future students and myself who are still in college that are good students and meet the GPA requirement at times, but just don't pass that test taking time.
Ms. Vasquez, thank you very much, and thank you for what you're doing to get your education and your focus on early childhood education. Dr. Venerable does a tremendous job at Dalton State University, and they have a very active foundation. I've had the opportunity to go up there, and I believe I'm still right in saying this. People, and I'll spread this for the committee's knowledge and those that are listening, at Dalton State up there, their average debt upon graduation is the lowest in the university system. For the lowest component, they do a tremendous job with the dollars they receive, producing results and producing people that are going to be, that are and will in the future be very big assets to our community. So thank you for your time this morning, and thank you for your testimony.
Thank you.
Yeah. Representative Carpenter, remotely. I'm sure you want to say something.
Thank you, Chairman. Can
about
you hear me okay? I'm out here in Garth Brooks country.
Yes, if you didn't understand, I think the representative is in Oklahoma this morning. He's trying to help them with their electrical issues, I think. Representative Carpenter, you have the floor.
I just wanted to give a shout out to Dalton State. Thanks for coming out today and making your point, and I appreciate you. And we just, anytime I hear my college's name, I want to give it a shout out. So thank you so much for being here today to speak to the committee, and I wish you much success.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm proud to be a road runner.
Thank you, Representative. Virtually, Representative Park.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Thank you again, Representative Evans, for another great bill that would seek to remove barriers for students who are trying to obtain higher access to higher education. I just wanted to again commend you for your good work. Coming from a low-income immigrant background myself, it was because of the Hope Scholarship that I've been afforded the opportunities and privileges that I've had the benefit of being born and raised in Georgia. And I hope that the wisdom of this committee and the Georgia General Assembly will allow us to continue to move forward with some of these bills, because I think they're just a great opportunity, again, to remove barriers, particularly with House Bill 89, which really provides a second chance to a certain degree once a student is enrolled. But I just wanted to thank you again, Representative Evans, for your good work.
Thank you, Representative. Indeed, hope changes lives, and there's so many of us now in this General Assembly that can say that we are showing the promise that Zell Miller and the legislature back in the 90s hoped would come to fruition.
Thank you, Representative Park. Representative Evans, the chair will try not to take it personally that you talk about being a recipient of hope and or poking fun at the chair's age, but I will try not to. I know you're not doing that.
Purely accidental, Mr. Chairman.
I'm joking. Did you have anything further? I see no further questions. I'd seen virtually or in person. I have no speakers unless I've missed someone. I'm looking around the room. So I'll let you wind these up. And as you can see, there's some things intertwined that after these hearings today will probably make sense for us to circle up along with Representative Dukes, perhaps the student finance, and talk about, a marriage of the ideas and how to do that. Because there's also conversations ongoing that the scholarship over time, as you well know, you were here when it started, or when we worked with it before, of the steps or the categories that come out of Hope. And anything that we do at the Zell level impacts dollars relative to the percentage of tuition that gets paid for the regular Hope Scholarship. There is a conversation about trying to move those percentages back up toward, a higher level. So that needs to be, that conversation needs to be had in addition to the conversation with all these bills. But we look forward to that. I'll give you the last word.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the thoughtfulness of you and the committee with regard to the Zell Miller Scholarship. And certainly my goal overall is to get that percentage up for the Hope Scholarship for more students, whether that's through the Zell or through the regular Hope Scholarship, and certainly understand that additional study may be required on that. I do hope that part of that study, though, looks very closely at the utility of the SAT. And I will just say to the committee, I think if you compare the fiscal notes for Representative Wilkerson's bill and mine, you will see that the SAT truly tells us very little, if anything at all. I would urge the committee, though, to please consider more quickly passing House Bills 87 and 88. Again, they come well under what we know are recurring funds being added to this unrestricted reserve. We can very well afford it. It's an amazing return on investment. We desperately need it because we need more of our Georgians getting these higher education credentials. And I just can't implore to you enough that this would be a great move forward for not just these individual students and changing their lot in lives, but for our workforce and for our economy. It begs for it. Thank you again for the opportunity to present, and I appreciate your favorable consideration. Thank you.
Thank you. And that concludes our discussion on these items for today. We will move on next after a break to House Bill 1 and then to House Bill 120. I show 1022. Let's reconvene at 10:30. We'll reconvene at 10:30. So we'll stand in recess until 10:30. All right, good afternoon, everybody. If we go ahead and settle back in, come and join us if you wish, and let's get everybody that wants to be here and close the door. I'm reminded on our break that the House committee rooms are an extension of the House floor, and masks are required unless you are speaking. If you don't want to abide by that rule, you can certainly watch us online. But I've been asked to remind everyone that this is an extension of the floor. Members and guests alike, if you want to participate with us in the room, we need to ask you to wear a mask unless you are speaking. We're ready to move on now. Representative Bonner, there you are. I'm going to turn your mic on back there. We're going to go to HB1. I apologize for the delay. We are getting a substitute out for HB 120, but we're going to move on HB1. Let me make another thing clear. There was some confusion during recess. I was speaking with some of the folks here for some bills, and they were questioning, would there be a meeting later in the day? Was there a sub on this? There was some confusion as to when crossover day. Let me be clear. Let me be completely clear that we are hearing only on these bills today. Any rumor out there that we're hearing only and then there will be a meeting later in the day to vote a bill that we do not have in front of us today is absolutely false. If I have nothing else as part of my reputation in this House in my time here, I hope I have the reputation of making sure that this committee and any committee that I have led, had the privilege of leading, is going to have the information in time to make an informed decision. So there will be, when we adjourn today, the House Higher Education Committee will be finished with its work for the week, and I will wish everyone a safe travel home and a restful, if not short, weekend before we're back here for a full week next week. So just to be clear on that. With that, Representative Bonner, you have the floor. If you would tell us, I know there's, I think you had a substitute as well, so if you just speak out your LC number that we'll be working on.
Are we on back here? Great. First, I'd like to apologize for starting that rumor, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I appreciate the opportunity to present to this hearing. We are working off of LC 490407S. That's LC 490407S. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll just kind of run through give an overview, and run through the essence of the bill, and then take any questions that the committee may have. So House Bill 1 will protect and clarify the First Amendment rights our students should enjoy on our public colleges and universities. This bill seeks to accomplish this in three ways. First, by protecting what students may say. Second, protecting where they can exercise free speech. And third, protecting with whom our students can speak with and freely assemble. It protects what students can say by ensuring that public universities and colleges do not ban expressive activity while on campus, so long as their conduct is lawful and does not disrupt the functioning of that college or university. It protects where they can speak by banning so-called free speech zones or areas of campus that are designated for free speech, rather than all of the commonly accessible areas of campus. It also clarifies that universities can impose published reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions on speech that are content neutral and not directed toward any specific group. And finally, it protects with whom students can speak by protecting the freedom of association, which ensures that student groups can require their leaders and members to agree to live and abide by policies that are consistent with that group's beliefs. So walking through the bill, lines 26 through 67 simply define the relevant terms, with the heart of the bill beginning on line 68. Lines 68 through 79 establish that unrestricted outdoor areas of campuses are public forums and provide for reasonable time, place, and manner restrictions, as I've noted. Lines 80 through 101 provide the protections on what students may say, while allowing the college or university to restrict any unlawful activity that materially and substantially disrupts the functioning of the public institution. And the freedom of association protection begins on line 102 and runs through line 114. In order to ensure these protections are provided for, there is a training component for those who have responsibility for educating and disciplining students. And then finally, Mr. Chairman, there's a cause of action in the event those rights enumerated in the bill are violated. And then Section 4 simply is the same language as the first portion. It just applies to our technical colleges. So one to our universities, and then the other, the same things attributed to our technical colleges. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I know that was a brief overview. I know the committee has seen a version of this bill previously, so at this time I'll be happy to take any questions.
You have a couple questions. Dr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So I have a couple of questions. As you said, we have seen this before. So I went back and kind of did a deep dive on the bill that we passed out of committee last session and the bill that was brought to us before, and then the bill that I got this morning. And I noticed a few things that were removed the last time we had this conversation that were back. And so I just wanted to clarify why you added some of those things back. And so I'll start at line 56. I remember very distinctly having a conversation about the definition of harassment last session. And I remember having a conversation about the words severe, pervasive, and subjectively and objectively offensive, and talking about how those were legal terms and what those meant. And at the end of that, at the conclusion of that conversation, we did decide that it was best that that language be removed, and the version that passed out of committee did not have that language. One of the reasons why is because this does not include singular instances of harassment, and that could be problematic. So my first question is, why was this language put back into the bill?
Back and certainly scrubbed all the different versions, and what we defaulted to was the language that has been set before us in various court cases. So this definition of harassment is nearly verbatim from a case, Davis versus Monroe County, which dealt specifically with harassment in the education context. So what we did is to go back and just make sure that the language that we were presenting had in some way been vetted through the judiciary, and this is where we came back to.
So I also looked back and looked over some cases having to do with this specific language. And what I found is that a few states have found that that language and definition for harassment is actually very restricting and causes, especially when it comes to sexual harassment, which is what that case that you referred to was about. They found that it's very restrictive in that a lot of people who do feel like they are harassed or in a hostile work environment have found that they are not able to, or they're not able to basically say they're being harassed because of that definition. So I'm very concerned that that language was put back into the bill. But thank you for your explanation. If it's okay with you, Mr. Chair, I will yield for now, but I do have some other questions, but I don't want to take up the time.
If you have another question, yeah, we'll come back if you have another question. Yes,
Thank
ma'am.
you.
Chairman Dreyer.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Representative Bonner, I know you. I know you're a sincere and good person. I did want to address lines 102 and 110, which are very similar to the same lines in HB 995 that we discussed last year. And I'm trying to keep this brief, so I just want to confirm that last year when we were discussing these lines on HB 995, Travis Barham from the ADF group admitted that this would require state of Georgia to fund student groups that banned interracial dating among their members. And this language looks the same to me. And maybe, I know that is not your intent, but that would still be the effect of these lines. Is that not correct?
So we could certainly go to the various extremes of all of these cases. It does not allow for any unlawful activity. It does not allow for any groups that would actually be breaking the law or conducting any unlawful activity. There are groups that would certainly not be allowed on campus. As much as your example would offend me and abhor me, ultimately we have an obligation to protect the First Amendment of our students. And so my response to that would be that we don't need to shut down that speech. We need to encourage more speech so that we can shine the light on how abhorrent that particular viewpoint is.
Okay, Representative Bonner, then I guess we're all very clear that lines 102 through lines 110 would require the University of System of Georgia to fund student groups that ban interracial dating among their members. Thank you. No further questions.
The Vice Chairman of the Committee, Representative Earhart.
Thank you for bringing this bill, Representative Bonner. To follow up with the previous question, essentially this bill would require universities to fund organizations that, quite frankly, could have distasteful opinions on a wide variety of topics, not just the issue of interracial dating. It could be, there is no particular group has a license on what some of us may deem as distasteful or unattractive thought or speech. But this bill does not specifically say that is the only type of organization that would be funded. Any organization, and there is quite a large spectrum, I understand, of student groups, could hold an opinion that some folks might not agree with. But the point that you're making here is that the university would be funding groups with a whole wide variety of opinions, whether we like those opinions or not. Is that correct?
That's correct. I mean, I can't pick and choose what groups that this would be a part of, but there are any number of groups that offend me on any number of levels, whether it's a philosophical or religious or any number of levels out there. And I default back to the position that in this environment, especially on our college campuses and universities, that the answer is not to restrict speech, but the answer is to allow more speech. Because again, to my colleague's comment, and I certainly appreciate him picking out the most extreme example, but I would submit that if there's a group on a campus that holds that belief, I would certainly hope that there are any number of groups that hold that exact opposite belief as I do, to shine the light and to expose that as being something that requires discussion and has no place in our society today. So if we can't do that on our college campuses and universities, then where exactly are we going to do that? Because if we decide to go down the road of allowing the government or a governmental institution to pick and choose what groups they're going to enforce the First Amendment rights, then I think we've definitely doing a disservice to our entire society.
Thank you.
Again, we'll take another questions or another question. Let me get my grammar correct. We'll take more questions here, but I want to be careful that we don't get into debating the bill. The question is, do you believe that does that, and it does or it doesn't? We'll invite you back at a later date for a presentation of the final bill that we will take action on to make the case for it. So let's try to keep this questioning about members' understanding of what the language is, not their opinion of it. Should it or should it not be in there? We'll have an ample day for discussion of that. That is the policy discussion. This is for questions. Dr. Clark.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. So going back to the previous HB 995 that we passed out of committee, and going to the current version of the bill, I noticed another thing that we changed before that That now looks very different in this new bill. On line, my page is kind of cut off. Line 102 and 103, it says no public institution of higher education may deny a religious, political, or ideological student organization. Why did you choose to specify these types of organizations and not just student organizations, which is what was in the amended bill that we passed in 2020?
So we wanted to be specific in these, and so what this does is just simply allow for more specificity. So religious, political, or ideological groups. If you simply said all student, organizations, that you start bringing in, fraternities, sororities, all of that. We wanted to be specific in these particular organizations.
Okay, but to the previous question, you just talked about how it's so important that we have all these organizations and that they not be hindered. But now, in the bill, you specifically only outline certain types of organizations and not all. And I find that concerning, especially since the version that we passed in 2020 said all student organizations. I have a follow-up question. Is it your belief that if a student organization is not funded by the public university, that it cannot operate on the campus? And is there anything that prevents students that have a particular belief from doing whatever they want to do on campus in these now areas of campus that are no longer free speech zones? And why is it necessary that these public universities must use taxpayer dollars to fund organizations that could discriminate against certain students?
So look, I'm going to stop us here for a second. I want to get. I'll let you to answer the question, but I want to go if we have online. You get and see if we have her online. Yes, I see you. You have. You knew I was coming to you, Ms. Bowen. Can you answer this question so that we can then further answer Dr. Clark's question? The funding that we're talking about in lines 102, may deny benefit or privilege. Talk to us about what that means and where those dollars come from. Ms. Bowen.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Chairman Martin, and thanks members of the committee for the opportunity to be here today. I will say initially we do have the same concerns with the current draft of the bill, specifically at lines 102 and 110, and then the corresponding provisions at 234 to 242 for TCSG. Specifically to your question, Chairman Martin, the funds for our student organizations do come from student activity fees. But our concerns here lie in a broader definition from the federal definition that we cannot deny students any benefits or activities based on any number of protected categories that are listed out in federal discrimination law, be that race, gender, or any number of protected categories. We do have concerns that the Senate, as I testified a lot with you guys last year, that the current House bill would cause our institutions in complying with this bill then to necessarily violate federal discrimination laws. So I know that's more than you asked for. I hope that answered your question. I'm happy to answer any other questions you have.
Okay, so thank you for that. So Dr. Clark, basically you said tax dollars, and I mean fees, but I just wanted to be clear, it is coming from student fees. So now if you have a better memory than I, Representative Bonner, would you like the lady to restate her question? Or I think her question was, do you think they can't operate on campus if they're not funded? I just wanted to get the learned attorney to articulate where the funding came from. Representative Bonner.
So in my understanding, this simply creates an equal footing for everybody. So that if funding is offered to one organization, it's got to be offered to all organizations equally.
To the university systems point, that is USG, right? Yes, okay. To the university.
Out of clarity, ask me and or
to the university. To the university systems point, if, for example, an organization's sincerely held beliefs are discriminatory, or their mission or purpose is somehow discriminatory. This puts the university in a very uncomfortable position to where they might be violating federal law in order to comply with this state law, and then that could jeopardize that university, open them up to lawsuits and other things. And so we talked about this before, and that is why that language was removed. I specifically remember, and so I'm just very...
Well, let me ask further questions. So the question I believe Dr. Clark asked, and you may have heard it clearly, is does this put you at odds if some of these organizations have practices or beliefs that are per se discriminatory in federal law? Ms. Bowen, that's pointed toward you.
I apologize. I thought that
No.
was to Representative Bonner. Yes, that is our concern, is that there are student organizations who may have those sincerely held beliefs, those standards of conduct, that women are inferior, men are inferior. Add in any protected category you will, then under the state law, we would still be required to fund those activities. But those would be activities that our students would then be barred from participating in based on their membership in a protected category. So that is our concern, that we are put in a situation of either violating state law or violating federal law and facing consequences for both.
Provide some context and a counterpoint to that. I do have Attorney Matt Sharp with Alliance Defending Freedom here that can specifically speak to that federal issue, given their history in Supreme Court cases and cases across the country.
One addition, I'm sorry, the Chair said we'll get to Ms. Sharp when we get to speakers. I have another question from Chairman Dreyer before we move on.
Mr. Chair, is it okay if I ask Ms. Bowen a question?
Just given the day we're having, you sound the question and the chair will decide. He will.
Yes, sir. That's great. Mr. Chair, what Ms. Bowen has said that there will be implications and consequences for violating federal law, but I think I would like to know what those consequences are, Mr. Chair. I think it's fair.
Ms. Bowen, can you help what those potential consequences might be?
Yes, there could be any number of consequences. There could be private causes of action for violating federal discrimination law. So that's an individual student suing our institutions at a cost to the state of Georgia. There is a potential for a loss of federal funding for violating federal laws, Title VI and Title IX specifically here. And then in the state version, there is a provision for a private cause of action with attorney's fees. So that would also subject the state to additional penalties, including attorney's fees for a violation of this corresponding state provision. So we're in a situation where we have to choose to, we could be in a situation where we have to choose to violate one and that untenable position, and in either choice would be subjecting the state to additional fees and penalties.
Thank you. Any further questions? Virtually, Representative Park.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I do have a few questions for the author, if I may.
You can have one. Pick the best one.
Just
No.
one. I'll try my best. Representative Bonner, I thank you for your sincerity in trying to protect free speech in Georgia and on our college campuses. Can you clarify, are there any free speech zones in any of our USG or TCSG institutions today?
There are. I've reviewed, for instance, I did review University of Georgia's free speech code, and it is certainly on the right track. What this does, Representative Park, is it essentially codifies the fact that regardless of how administrations change with USG, different presidents come in, any of those things, that there's consistency across the board. So there are, I'm sure, cases in our system now where there are specific free speech zones designated that may not be fall into that definition of commonly accessible areas on campus. And what this would do is just ensure that moving forward, that would be the case.
Would I be able to get clarification?
That was short. Representative Park, you can have another.
Thank you. Would I just be able to get some clarification from Ms. Bowen from USG as to her opinion as to whether or not USG does have any free speech zones or things that this bill would seek to prohibit?
Ms. Bowen, did you understand the question? Could you hear the question? Okay, please answer.
I did. Thank you, Chairman Martin. Thank you, Representative Park. We do not currently have any free speech zones on any of our campuses for our students, faculty, and staff.
Thank you. Mr. Chairman, if I may, so in reading through this bill, Representative Bonner, one of the concerns I have is the potential broad implications this bill would provide, as well as creating additional and unnecessary causes of action against Georgia colleges and universities. But if I can kind of walk you through some of my concerns. On line 76, the definition of campus community, that includes invited guests. And I would assume that there are no limitations on the number of invited guests who may be able to come to our colleges to say whatever it is that they want. Is that correct?
There's not a set number, but it does allow universities to put in place time, manner, and place restrictions, reasonable.
So I think the concern that I have in reading the bill, and please correct me if I'm wrong, is that this would essentially allow for guests, those who are not students, to come and say whatever it is that they want, including hate speech, which is protected by the First Amendment of the U.S. Constitution, and limit students from responding to certain speech on the college campuses in which they pay tuition. This would further, especially given the private cause of action that you provide, would allow non-students or invited guests, others who may be defined as or within the definition of campus community, to then bring a cause of action even if they aren't students. Is that correct?
I don't think it allows for non-students. There's not a provision for non-students to bring that cause of action. But I would say that in kind of what the scenario you're describing is, first I would challenge the fact that the students would, students with an alternative view would have no voice. They would have an equal voice as anyone else that came onto that campus, whether that was another student, another organization, or an invitee of a student onto that campus. They would have just as much ability and right to exercise their free speech as any other group. And again, this does not protect any unlawful activity. I keep going back to that because, what has been intimated here is stuff that members don't agree with or may not agree with, or speech that we may find offensive. But at the end of the day, it does not provide for any unlawful activity. And in fact, it gives the university system ample opportunity to prevent that unlawful activity and intervene if necessary. And to the point of additional cause of action, well, the reality is now is that there is a cause of action. That's a big part of why we even brought this bill, because we're spending taxpayer dollars now defending lawsuits that have already been filed. So in essence, what has been brought up are potential scenarios. We can cite actual cases, including one before the Supreme Court, including another case from Georgia Tech where the University System of Georgia settled for $50,000. And that's not $50,000 of the university system's money, that's $50,000 of the taxpayers of Georgia. So one of the purposes of this bill is to reduce the number of lawsuits. And what we have seen throughout the country in states where this bill has been enacted, it has done just that. So I would challenge the notion that this would allow for more lawsuits and more causes of action. We're already there.
Well, if I may, I would push back a little on that notion, given the statement of the attorney from USG saying there are no free speech zones, which this bill seeks to address, and then create an additional cause of action for, again, any person who is considered a member of the campus community, which is very broadly defined, to then file a lawsuit against our colleges and institutions, which I'm concerned would lead to a lot of frivolous lawsuits. But again, I am concerned that one of the unintended consequences of this bill, if it does become enacted, is that it would protect the ability of guests to spout hate speech on our college campuses and limit students from responding, especially given the principle that you've noted of, the remedy to bad speech is more speech.
Well, I would certainly, push back a little bit to my colleague.
We're not going to do that anymore, though.
Okay.
We're not going to debate back and forth between a member and y'all are on the floor every day together. We're going to have another opportunity to do this. Questions, is what we see in the bill, and so again, we have more work to do here, and we'll debate that. Representative Park, I appreciate your questions. I don't mean to cut you off, but if you guys aren't that far apart on the floor, visit with each other Monday on your beliefs of what it does or doesn't do. But we'll have that policy discussion, and each member will be able to have their belief when we get to that point. I want to address today, let the gentleman address what he's presenting, and the members are to ask questions relative to why this is back based on the bill we passed last year. I think those are fair questions. What has changed in 12 months? So can you work with me on that, Representative? You're a valued member of our committee and a thoughtful one, but I'm going to ask you to take that offline with the author.
Yes, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. Representative Earhart, the Vice Chairman of the committee.
Yes, thank you. And I wanted to, if Ms. Bowman is still available, I think she is. I don't see her on my screen, but I did have a question just to follow up with some comments she made regarding the funding, university funding of some of these student groups. And there's a particular, if I could ask you, please, and thank you, Mr. Chairman, for allowing me a final question. Just to clarify, because it's a phrase that you used twice, Ms. Bowman, and that was the nature of student organizations' beliefs and practices, possibly being in violation of state or federal law. And so I just wanted to clarify, make sure that I'm understanding what you're saying. Is it your contention that a student organization's beliefs, which I think could also, thoughts or opinions, would somehow be in violation of federal law? Or is it you just simply talking about the certain practices that they may engage in? I would like some clarification on your phrase, beliefs and practices.
Thank you, Representative Earhart. Thank you for the ability to clarify here. Just to clarify, our students may have any beliefs. Our students may have a number of beliefs that we all don't agree with. And the beauty of the First Amendment is that they are able to have those beliefs and voice those beliefs. Our concern with the student organization provision, specifically at lines 102 to 110, is as it's currently worded. If it's not the student organization may combine, may gather, and may have these beliefs. But when they start denying the ability for others to participate in the beliefs, especially denying that participation based on a protected class, that's where we get into issues with federal discrimination law. And so the beliefs, even if none of us agree with them, the beliefs are fine. Hate speech is still protected speech, but it's just more of that access to benefits and programs from federally funded institutions. So I appreciate that opportunity to clarify. We do believe that the version that this committee passed last year, that's provision specific to student organizations, would meet the purpose, which still ensure in solid terms that organizations can't be discriminated against or can't be treated differently because of their beliefs, but then would also provide us the ability to adequately enforce the federal discrimination laws. Thank you.
Thank you. The chair's going to move on. Representative Carpenter had wanted to ask a question. I have, he is allowing me to ask that for him so that we, in the interest of time, since he does have the remaining measure on the agenda today, and he asked the question, I'll phrase it in the question for the committee, not necessarily toward the author. But isn't it true we would get around this funding question if we just lowered the fees on students and let each student organization fund themselves. So if we can't fund everybody or agree on how to make that equally, isn't it true we could just let the students keep their money and privately give it to the organization which they want? That's, I guess, a rhetorical question for the committee to consider, but the one that the chair would have pause on to think about. Yeah, wouldn't it be great if people just got to spend their money the way they chose, rather than the group of us debate on who can or cannot have access to it? So I spread that across the committee from Representative Carpenter, a wise man currently driving through Oklahoma. I'm going to let you have a couple, whatever you need, Representative Bonner, and then we're going to go to testimony.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. We certainly can go to testimony for sake of time, and I will certainly make myself available to all the members of the committee for any questions and concerns. And we did have a meeting with USG, and they provided some feedback on the bill as presented, that we are certainly committed to working with them moving forward in order to get to a bill that we can all support.
Very well. I appreciate your willingness to move forward here. We have I have at least 3 or 4 speakers, and we do have another bill. It's 11. We had scheduled this for 3 hours. We're clearly not going to make that at this point. But so I'm going to ask people to come forward and make their remarks. Again, if the bill changes significantly, we'll let you testify again. But first speaker I have on this, Mr. Griffin, Georgia Baptist Mission Board.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman and committee, and this opportunity to be able to speak to you today. Georgia Baptist Mission Board, which I'm the public affairs representative. My name is Mike Griffin. The Georgia Baptist Mission Board supports Representative Josh Bonner and the passage of House Bill 1 on the Forum Act. Georgia Baptists are the largest denomination faith group in the state, on average of representing around 1.4 million Georgians and 3,600 Georgia Baptist churches. We are also represented on around 42 college campuses throughout the state through our Baptist Collegiate Ministry. Our campus ministers are there to provide ministry opportunities to meet the needs of the students, for students to fellowship with one another, and to help them grow spiritually while getting an education. In relationship to this legislation, we believe that a student's First Amendment rights are not dropped at the door when they enter our government schools of higher learning. We think that it is good to have policies in place that add extra assurance that all students will enjoy the highest free speech protection allowed under the U.S. Constitution. We've nothing to fear from allowing our students the right to peaceably express themselves regarding what they believe and to hear opposing viewpoints. This is one of the beauties of living in a free society and under a constitution such as ours. So therefore, we support the Forum Act, and we ask for the committee's favorable vote. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. Griffin, thank you very much.
Thank you.
Mr. Pipkin, Faith and Family Coalition. Adam, yes, sir.
Yes, sir. My name is Adam Pipkin. I'm the Executive Director for Faith and Freedom Coalition of Georgia, and just wanted to rise in support of this bill, and we support it in its current form. We believe that free speech should be encouraged on college campuses and not limited. And we believe this bill provides that framework and will ensure a consistency across all of our colleges moving forward. So we ask for your favorable consideration for this bill.
Thank you, sir. I think I missed, I think I gave you Faith and Family instead of Faith and Freedom, both good.
I've been called worse.
Well, families need freedom, sir, so we appreciate your remarks. I see no questions any online. Christopher Bruce. Christopher, you're signed up twice. Do you feel like you need to speak twice, or was you just signed up for us? Yes, sir. Yes, sir, it has. Well, in either case, you have the floor, my friend.
Well, thank you, Mr. Chairman, and good morning, members of the committee.
My name is Christopher Bruce. I'm the political director for the ACLU of Georgia. And let's jump right into this because this has been discussed in House Bill 995 and Senate Bill 318 last year. And I want to thank you, Chairman Martin, and the other members of the committee who worked so hard on this bill, especially addressing the issues that have been talked about today. The ACLU of Georgia opposes House Bill 1. And although we have a variety of other concerns and interests at this time, for the sake of time, I want to focus on the concerns that we're really talking about. And that's based off of the committee substitute. And those are lines 102 to 110 and lines 234 to 242. This bill, as currently worded, will roll out the red carpet for student organizations at Georgia's public colleges and universities to discriminate in their membership and leadership. This provision was addressed in changes this committee made last legislative session. And again, I'm hoping that this committee will rectify these concerns with the provisions in House Bill 1. Specifically, I'm referring to Section 20-1-33E, lines 130 through 137, and in the new version, 102 to 110 in lines 234 and 242 in the committee substitute. So as discussed, currently the university system of Georgia and many of Georgia's public colleges and universities have policies that prevent student organizations from discriminating in their membership and or leadership. These policies are designed to protect civil rights and civil liberties of students regardless of whether those students are federally protected class. Non-discrimination policies promote equal protection under the law for all students at Georgia's public colleges and universities. And these policies foster an open, safe, and invigorating environment in which students can learn and grow while attending the state's public colleges and universities. That's how the system's set up. And current policy allows public colleges and universities to withdraw official recognition and funding from student organizations if they are found to discriminate on the basis of sex, religion, national origin, ethnicity, color, age, gender, gender identity or expression, marital status, citizenship, sexual orientation, or disability. I'm pointing those out to make sure that there's a point of these are the reasons why we're opposing this bill. The passage of HB 1 would permit and even sanction discrimination under the guise of the First Amendment. In particular, sections 20-1-33 lines or lines 131 through 137 and the same language in the proposed committee substitute would prevent Georgia's public institutions and higher education from withdrawing funding and other benefits for certain student organizations, even in the case of membership-based discrimination. This language severely undermines the important policy currently in place, opens the door for widespread discrimination within our state's public colleges and universities, and essentially forces our public institutions to condone discrimination at the expense of vulnerable students. These students at our public institutions have the right to freedom of expression, and university anti-discrimination policies do not violate the First Amendment. We're seeing this in 2010, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in Christian Legal Society versus Martinez that public colleges and universities are within their rights to require student organizations seeking school recognition and funding to adhere to the school's non-discrimination policy, as long as the policy is applied equally. But as we see in House Bill 1, this seeks to circumvent that ruling and the university's non-discrimination policies currently in place by alleging the act of withdrawing funds and recognition from discriminatory student organizations. Is discrimination in and of itself. This bill twists, obscures, and ultimately contradicts the true purpose of non-discrimination policies. So lines 130 to 137 of the as introduced version of the bill and lines 102 to 110 and lines 234 through 242 in the proposed committee substitute, which we got today, attempt to put the sheep's clothing of free speech over the wolf of discriminatory conduct. HB 1 would have a chilling effect on the important protections of Georgia's public colleges and universities to bar discrimination. The American ideals of free speech must not be used for the sword of discrimination. So in closing, the ACLU of Georgia believes this legislation is, one, unnecessary, and that this committee should not pass this legislation. And at the very least, this committee could revise the aforementioned language. And we can supply language to the committee if requested. We're here to help. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield for any questions.
Thank you, Mr. Bruce. And to be clear, the reason you were signed up twice is you signed up when you came today and you had let our office know earlier today, so you should be commended for that. And that's the reason you were doubled up, my friend.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
I thank you for that. If you would, pass along to the committee secretary, committee assistant, Sarah Gallion, the line numbers to which you referred, so we don't have to look back at the tape. If you'd like to do that, we'd love to have that information.
Happy to do that, Mr. Chairman.
I see no questions for the gentleman. I see no one else that had signed up to testify. Is there anybody here that missed signing up? Yes, sir.
Good morning, Mr. Chairman. I'm Matt Sharp with Alliance, Alliance Defending Freedom that Representative Bonner had mentioned, if I may. Just real briefly, I wanted to specifically address the question about the Freedom Association and the loss of federal dollars. So about 14 states have enacted free association protections. This includes many states that have enacted the exact language under consideration in this bill today. And not only have none of those states lost any federal funding, nor has there been any of the scenarios that have been brought up today. What they have resulted in is a variety of student groups being able to receive recognition, to receive the same benefits and privileges as all of their other counterparts, and ultimately have a place where more speech is allowed, more viewpoints are allowed, and the community campus is allowed to thrive as it's supposed to. And so I just wanted to briefly address that specific point, that nothing in this would jeopardize any federal funding. And the reason why is the courts have drawn a clear line between what a university does and what private student groups with their own views, their own policies and things like that do. And the courts have been very clear to say we are not going to, nor should we ever impute what a private organization does to a university simply because they're recognized or receive benefits or funding available to all student groups on equal terms. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. I see no question for the gentleman. Representative Bonner, I'll let you have the last word, and then I'm going to take the chair's prerogative and give you some strongly worded advice.
Understand. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think we certainly had a good hearing today. We certainly took lots of notes. As I said, we're more than willing to work with individual members of the committee as well as anyone else that presented today to come to a resolution on a bill that we can all support and get out of this committee.
One day I'm going to learn how to drive this panel here. I thank you, and I don't want to be brief in this, but I think there's not a member of this committee, nor a member in the State House or State Senate that didn't swear an oath to uphold the Constitution of the United States and the state and the laws of same, and the Constitution of the state of Georgia and the laws of Georgia. So if we're trying to defend the First Amendment, I think everyone on this committee, regardless of party, everyone at the university system and the technical college system, look to achieve that. That said, there's clearly a difference of opinion. Our attorney from the university, the gentleman that just spoke, have a difference of opinion as to what may be the impact of passing certain words on paper and their meaning. This committee did pass last year a bill that it felt good about. The author may, beg to differ, and that's fine. That's the member's privilege. I mean that seriously. If this mask weren't on my face, you'd see a smile when I say that. That's part of the process in debating policy here. Here's what I would like to suggest, and in fact, here's what I want to happen before we come back before this committee again. I ask myself every time I wake up and when I come down here, will what we do, in my opinion, I'm one of 180, in my opinion, when I leave the day, have I done something that will be good for the citizens of Georgia? I believe, Representative Bonner, you asked yourself that question, as does Chairman Dreyer, the Vice Chairman of our committee, Earhart, and everyone else. What I would like to do is we have a bill that passed this committee last year. You have a bill that differs from that. I would like, and I will make myself available, and I'm going to invite some members of this committee in an ad hoc subcommittee from both parties to sit and look at that. And I would like to hear a case for why Georgia and Georgians are better served with language that is in this substitute as opposed to that was in the bill that we had last year. I want us to have that conversation, and then we'll see what we bring back for debate, if that makes it. Well, I'm happy to involve the gentleman that just spoke. He sounds like I believe you're an attorney, right, sir? He's shaking his head, yes. I know that Ms. Bowen is from the university system. But let's have that conversation on specific things. There may yet be some things in between there that we agree on. There may still be some things that we do not, and that'll be the discussion. But I want to pare it down to those things. It's tough when we have this substitute and we have this bill that we had last year for the committee for those of us that aren't lawyers to understand exactly what's changed. So basically, I want to look at a red line between what we had last year and this bill, or this bill and what we had last year, so that we can look at that specifically and know why it changed. And then we'll try to do that as quickly as possible as the clock is running. And when we do that and we can isolate on those items, we'll have you back and we'll have another hearing to discuss those changes. Fair enough? And I'll get with the vice chairman of the committee, and we'll put an ad hoc group together to work on. Everybody will get the information, but it's impossible to get the whole committee, in a working group to work around through that. With that, we're going to move on to 120. We have been here for a second, so I'm looking at 1126. This one is going to be fast because we have the information passed out. We'll stand in recess till 11:30. In recess till 11:30.